Hi everybody, welcome to the interview room. I'm here in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee at the Alcatraz East Crime Museum. Have you ever wondered how serial killers get away with their crimes and sometimes utilize cars as tools? Well, let's go inside and take a look. I'm Chris McDonough, a retired homicide detective. I've interviewed thousands of people, from serial killers to ministers. Welcome to the interview room. You know, the most interesting thing about Gacy is these were his props in terms of, how he would pull his victims in and then he'd bury them underneath his house. Fascinating. This is his paint kit, his jacket, typewriter. Pogo was his character. These were the outfits that he would wear, and that's one of his paintings down at the bottom. Fascinating. So one of the most interesting things about Ted was, he confessed to over 30 murders, but they actually thought he did more. And his first crime occurred in 1974. He then just took off from there. And of course, he was arrested after he did the sorority girls in Florida. Skip Sperber did all the bite work on him. And it was a pretty interesting caper. The thing about his Volkswagen is he would take the handle off of the door, he would remove the seat, and then he'd wear a cast and hit him on the head and get him in the car and then drive away. So this is some of the bite work photography that Skip probably would have seen. The interesting thing here about him is they found a bite on the bottom side of one of the victims in Florida. The dental impressions were sent to forensic odontologist Skip Sperber, and from there he testified in trial that, it was a match to Ted Bundy. It was one of the first times odontology forensic work was actually done in the country. So here's a wall of some of Ted Bundy's victims. As you can see, he confessed to over 30 murders. They thought he was actually responsible for many, many more. And, I got to say about Ted Bundy, he was articulate, he was smart, he was looked at as an individual who, quite frankly, even the judge said during his sentencing trial, could have participated as a really outstanding lawyer in a court of law. But as you can tell, this is one of the last interviews he did with Dr. Dotson. And in this interview, he talks about how pornography is what actually drove him. When he was a younger boy, He would go out at night, he had an extensive juvenile record, and he would look for pornography and eventually get into Peeping Tom, and that kind of escalated itself into serial murder. So this is Bundy's murder kit, a picture of it. But these are also his dental impressions. So again, going back to what I was talking about with Dr. Sperber, Skip actually worked this particular case, and this is a typewriter that Ted had used. These are some various types of pictures where people were in panic before he was captured. This is 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, Bundy's final victim. You don't want to know what he did to this young lady. It was horrific. So one thing about him, he was so charming that as you can see, the judge is even enamored by him. But what they don't tell you is the fact that he was a torturous, evil animal. He would go back to his victims, sometimes decapitate them, sometimes, necrophilia, sleep next to them. At one point, he even decapitated a victim, brought it back to his house, and threw it in his fireplace of his ex-girlfriend's house. So this was the first Volkswagen that Ted bought. Now, what's interesting about this Volkswagen of itself, he had removed the passenger seat, and then he would remove the door handle and trap his victims inside. And as you can see in this Volkswagen, it's been modified. But what he would do is he'd wear a cast, and he'd ask his victims either to walk over and help him into the car, or carry books or items of that nature. And then once he had them on the other side of the door, he'd whack them in the head, get them into the car, and of course the door handle was removed, and quite frankly the victim was trapped, and that was the end of it for them. What else is fascinating about this car is you'll notice there's a sunroof on it. Quite frankly, there was never any light that entered into this car. It was pure evil. So as you can tell, this is O.J. Simpson's white Ford Bronco back in 1994. CHP, LAPD, LA Sheriff chased this down the interstate until it eventually ended up at O.J.'s mansion. So what people don't know, right after the homicides, Charles Manson was stopped in Oceanside, California by a CHP officer and given a ticket in the bread truck for a taillight that was out. That came up in the trial back in the initial phases of the investigation. And of course, he was a prolific songwriter. He thought in his own right, but that kind of ticked him off and kind of sent him off into space, quite frankly. Edward Gein used to make lampshades out of the skin of his victims. And this was a note that he sent to a neighbor, and he sent his tooth in that package.
The Alcatraz East Crime Museum also has an interesting display on prison execution, going in depth on the history of the electric chair, hanging, and lethal injection. They tell the story of the country's last public execution, which happened in 1936 in Owensboro, Kentucky, when Rainey Bethea was hanged after his conviction for the rape and murder of a 70-year-old woman. In the Outlaws of the Wild West display, the legends of that era and their crimes are well laid out and take visitors back to that time. From Tombstone, Arizona to the OK Corral, and from Deadwood, South Dakota to Dodge City, the outlaw gangs that ran from justice and their stories are all here. Have you ever heard of the Dalton Gang? We hadn't, but their story is fascinating. The outlaw gang included 4 Dalton brothers who pulled bank and train robberies. One of them survived a shootout after 2 bank robberies done on the same day. Among the artifacts, there's the death mask of Pancho Villa, the Mexican revolutionary and guerrilla leader who was assassinated in 1923. There's the Schofield revolver used by Wyatt Earp, at the shootout at the OK Corral in 1881. And the stories of the real Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid who, despite legend, never intentionally harmed their victims when they pulled train heists or robberies. One of the most interesting pieces of memorabilia here is Jesse James' blood-stained floorboard from the house where he was killed. You can still see the blood stain on the wood. Then there's the outlaw duo Bonnie and Clyde. The couple was known for robbing banks, small stores, and rural gas stations during the Great Depression. A number of items of memorabilia from that time are here on display. The Crime Museum is also dedicated to education and crime prevention, and their forensic science display is among the best that we've seen. They do an excellent job of breaking down crime scene investigation. They show how crime is solved through ballistics, DNA, blood analysis, fingerprinting, and facial reconstruction, to name a few. They show the tools involved in fingerprinting, including an old photo of the FBI lab. For folks interested in forensic science, there's an extensive collection of how-to displays. One of our favorite displays is the crime scene investigation. That dispels the myth that in one CSI TV episode, a crime could be processed and solved all within an hour. It's just not that way in real life. They break down facial reconstruction, blood analysis, and reading bones to determine the time of death. The autopsy is explained in detail, step by step, for the viewer. Dental X-ray matching is a whole science in and of itself, and many homicide cases are solved using dental identification. The museum does a good job of covering American crime A to Z. They take visitors back to nearly the beginning with medieval torture devices, and the story of pirates, like the infamous Blackbeard. He was the most feared and one of the most prolific pirates of the 18th century. Blackbeard may have been the first serial killer operating in the United States back then. How many people did he kill? And what tools did he choose to commit his crimes?
Hey everybody, thank you so much for being here at the interview room. From the Great Smoky Mountains to Pigeon Forge at the museum. I just want to let you know how grateful I am for everybody supporting us, and I hope you're having a good time along with us in this adventure. I also want to thank the good people of Tennessee up here in Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, the community of Sevierville. You guys are the best. I absolutely love the people up here, and for my friends on the interview room, if you get an opportunity to come up here, come visit the Great Smoky Mountains, come visit Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, go into that museum. It's pretty fascinating. And I appreciate you subscribing to our channel, becoming members, and if you can't, don't worry about that, that's okay. But more importantly, if you could share these videos, and I just want to let everybody know that I am grateful for everything you bring to this channel, to our mods, to our members, and just to our friends who come to visit. If you find that this content is good for you and you enjoy it, please consider subscribing and sharing like I mentioned a moment ago. Thank you so much for everything, and I'm here to tell you we're on the move, and you know I'm headed a certain direction. It's going to be good. You're not going to want to miss it. See you next week.